Welcome to Plant and Water. This week we kind of floated here today. I think we're still having storms that are going on, and in fact, we're kind of going with that, today and discussing. Do you like bread? Do you like bread? When a storm is coming. Mm-hmm. You're getting ready for it. You're watching the news. Okay, I got to get to the store.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that we're going to get?
Bread and milk. Yeah.
Bread and milk,
Mm-hmm.
And if I wasn't watching the news and maybe I watch it later on and everyone's already gone to the store, I go to the store to get bread, and this is generally what's left.
Hamburger buns.
Hamburger buns. That's right. Yeah, I'm holding that up, but for our listeners only, holding up a big thing of hamburger buns. But you know what? If that's all that's left on that shelf, that's what you grab, because that's what you got. Yep. You got to eat. You're going to have PB&J on that hamburger bun, and you're going to like it, kids.
Yeah.
All right? Okay, so that's the focus, when it comes to when we're without. And so that really helps set the stage in a kind of a funny way. But on a more serious note, it sets the stage for where our individuals are in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. So would you like to read that? Really 1 through 2.
In the days when the judges ruled, there was famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judea went to sojourn in the country of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion.
Yeah. So when we look at this, and many of us are familiar with Bethlehem, and you think about they're living in this place, and there is a famine in the land, and so Elimelech, Naomi, Mahlon, Chilion, they pack up. And they have to leave because there's no bread. They have no food. Mm-hmm. And so, in fact, during this time, grains would have been the biggest part of their diet. And so, because of a famine in the land, there's possibly no rain, which we're not experiencing. We don't even understand that concept this year with the amount of rain we've had in this region. But, when it comes to what they're going through with no rain, there is going to be no crops. And so no crops, no food, famine. And so because of that, they have to leave and they go to a land of Moab. And so it's, it's something that they're going to do, and so beggars can't be choosers. And that's what's happening at this point. They're beggars. And so they're going for greener pastures. They're looking for a better life. And so, it's almost like, those who came to the United States were looking for a better life. You hear that in stories. And that's where the American dream came from, white picket fence, the idea of making sure that we're, that we're thriving, that we're growing, that our family is taken care of. Right. And that's what everybody wants. And so that's what Elimelech would have wanted for his family. Sure. And so what we see, though, is they get the opposite. Of the greener pastures. I probably shouldn't have said this right before we started. I said, we might lose power. And
the lights just went out.
But
luckily, we're not hooked up to any of it.
We got battery power. We're good. But I think that was quite incredible because I was talking about what we were just saying was, okay, Elimelech, he was like, that is not what happened when it came to the greener pastures. Power goes out. That was perfect timing. Okay. So we go on to look at what happens, the second part of verse 2 all the way through verse 5.
Yeah. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem and Judea. That's Judah, right?
Yeah.
Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband.
So again, they're going for greener pastures, looking for a better life. 10 years later, Naomi has lost Elimelech. She's lost Mahlon, Chilion. She's lost her husband and her sons. She's left a widow with no one, literally, to care for her. Because think about how blessed she would have been. She was considered blessed because she, during this time, the breadwinner, literally, would have been the husband and her sons to take care of her. She was so taken care of, but 10 years removed, and she is destitute. No one to take care of her. And she's left with Orpah and Ruth. Side note, in fact, that's where Oprah Winfrey got her name. Her mother named her Oprah, but it was a mistake because she meant Orpah, so it would have been Orpah Winfrey. But anyway, that's just a completely side note. When it comes to this, the expectation was these are Moabite women. She's got to go back to her home. She's got to go back to Bethlehem because that's the only family she's got. Naomi does. And the expectation would be these are young women who they've not had children, and so they weren't expected to stay. She's telling them, y'all go back to your families, go back to Moab, get married, have children. In essence, that's what chapter 1 was dedicated to. But it was Ruth, Orpah. She hugs her and gives her a kiss, and that meant kiss goodbye. She goes, and then Ruth says, she clings to her. Yeah. Ruth says, do not entreat me to leave you or turn back from following you. She's like, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. Nobody expected that. And when Naomi saw that she could not persuade her anymore, it's like, okay, you're coming. That meant she had to get to work because Ruth was going to become the breadwinner, literally. And so let's look at. It's important to see when you look at this. Can you imagine where Naomi's mind would be? I mean, think about how devastated she is. You're preparing for the storm, and so we do what we can to get bread and we get milk, right? But when the storm comes and you're left with nothing.
Yeah. That's hard to deal with.
Bread and milk's not going to really help you, when it comes to that. And so we've got to recognize, though, that God was at work in this storm of Naomi's life. And so when God's at work, there's always more that meets the eye. When I asked the question before, do you like bread? I actually asked that exact question, but it had nothing to do with loaf bread. I asked that question one time. I was in college, and there was a young lady that I met, and her name was Aubrey. And I said, "Oh, Aubrey, do you like bread?" That is literally the first thing I asked this stranger. Because to me...
Bless her heart.
Bless her heart. And it was literally the most awkward thing because she obviously thought I was talking about loaf bread.
Bless his heart.
Bless my heart. I was talking about an obscure 1970s soft rock band that I happen to enjoy. Because I listened to my dad's 8-tracks when I was a kid. Bless my heart.
If you know that band, please comment and say that you do.
Please comment.
He asked me today. I was like,
he had no idea. I said, "Do you like bread?"
I
he was
do.
Like, "What?" He looked at me like, "What are you talking about?"
I like bread.
They had a song. There was a band called Bread Only. Okay, just bread. All right. And their song was, and Aubrey was her name. So it's probably why her parents called her Aubrey. Sure. She didn't know, and she thought I was the most crazy part. Well, she had, look at my shirt. All right, whatever.
Hey, we have an Aubrey here, by the way.
And we do have an Aubrey. And I talked to Doug, and I said, "Do you like bread?" He said, "How do you know about bread?" And I said, "Yes, I am with my people."
He's from Ohio, by the way.
He's from Ohio, yeah. So it was hilarious. And he named Aubrey after that song. So
there you go.
I had a reason. Anyway, so there's a reason I bring that story up is I asked a very obscure question. I had a completely different thought behind it. It had nothing to do with loaf bread. What's interesting is when we're talking about, Elimelech is going for he's going for this loaf bread. All right, so he's going for trying to make sure that his family is fed with bread. there's more to that than meets the eye. Bethlehem means house of bread. So they left the house of bread to try to find bread, because ironically, there was no bread in the house of bread. There was a famine in the land. And so when we're hearing the name Bethlehem that we've always heard, we've got to realize that God is working behind the scenes in His providence to make sure that there is bread in the house of bread. And many of you will know where we're going with this, but I'm telling you, let's buckle up, because it just gets even more powerful when we keep reading the book of Ruth. So remember where Naomi's thoughts would be. It's famine. It's family is gone and destitute and poverty. And what am I going to do? Look at her response. Ruth 1, 19 through 22.
It says, "So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, 'Is this Naomi?' She said to them, 'Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and then the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?' So Naomi returned, and Ruth and the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest."
All right, so this is 10 years later. They're coming home, and it is literally a warm welcome, a home welcome. Wow, Naomi has returned, because Bethlehem's a very small community. And so they all know her. And so immediately it's like, this is Naomi has returned. And so obviously she didn't RSVP. They wouldn't have known that she was coming, but here she is. But the response here from Naomi is it's surprising. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Because the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. She says, I left full and I've come back empty. If we actually stop and think about it, they didn't leave full. They left in a famine looking for food. But she was talking about, I left with my husband. I left with my sons. And now I've got nothing. One. Yeah. No, she has Ruth. She has Ruth. Her perspective is she's completely gutted. She is completely empty. So she sees, though, that it's the Lord that has done this. So she says, call me Mara. Well, that's interesting. The name Mara means bitter. It's the word in Hebrew means bitter. So she says, because the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. Context oftentimes gives us the meaning for names. So she's saying, I'm not Naomi anymore, I'm bitter. So again, who would really fault her for being bitter? Look at the storm that has just engulfed her life. But again, we got to recognize that we're able to see God is at work behind the scenes, and Naomi isn't seeing it yet. So, but notice though, the barley harvest is going on, the grain. So this is barley, that's where they get their bread from, barley. So it is just a decade later, a completely different situation. So there's a harvest that's going on. So everyone's going to be working. They're out in the field, and they're literally taking this barley harvest so that they can eat. And so Ruth is going to have to get to work, because she's been willing to live beyond expectation. And look at what's going to happen. She gets to work. She starts gleaning in the field of Boaz, and she's told by Naomi, Boaz is a relative of your late husband, a relative of ours. And so what's interesting is that's where we get into the concept of a redeemer. You and me, we're not accustomed to the redeemer concept. Under the law, it was understood that the next of kin, generally a brother to a deceased husband who did not have children, could take on his sister-in-law to be his wife and have a child for the deceased relative. Well, if there was no brother, then the closest relative could become a redeemer. But that child would not be considered his. It would be considered the deceased husband. So So again, though, that affects the inheritance of that person. Think about the imposition for the brother or the imposition for the relative, the cousin. I wasn't really planning on marrying this person. I wasn't planning on having a child for this person. Just really important. Genesis chapter 38 is something that's really almost looks like the most obscure passage in Scripture, because you're talking about Joseph going off, into slavery, and then it breaks off into Judah, his brother, who has his daughter-in-law Tamar, and his oldest son dies, and Tamar is then given Judah's second son, and Judah's second son was evil in the sight of the Lord, didn't want to have, it was an imposition for him, didn't want to have a child for his oldest brother, and so he does what's evil in the sight of God and doesn't allow Tamar to have the child. God strikes him dead. And so Judah has one more son, his youngest, and so it is expected that Tamar would receive the youngest son, so she waits for the youngest son. Well, Judah doesn't want his youngest son to die, and so he doesn't do what is right in the sight of God, does not give Tamar his youngest son. So Tamar takes matters into her own hands. She dresses as a prostitute and knows where Judah is going to be walking by the roadside. She acts as if she's a prostitute. Judah goes into her and she conceives twins, Perez and Zerah. That seems like the most random chapter in the world. We just summarized Genesis 38. Well, in fact, Judah hears that she is pregnant. He's going to have her stoned because she's played the prostitute. Then he comes to find out, because he had left his signet ring and his staff with her as surety, that he would give her this goat in payment. It's disturbing, when you stop and think about it. She leaves with the signet ring and the staff, and he's like, well, don't see her anymore. And she sends the signet ring and the staff and said, the person who gave me the staff and the signet ring is the dad. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by his daughter-in-law. You can't make this stuff up.
Did we just see an episode of, what was that old TV show that was just awful? Jerry Springer.
Jerry Springer.
You are the father.
Or The Young and the Restless. Like sands in the hourglass. These are the days of our lives.
You are the father.
Judah. Luke. You are. Okay,
Man.
no, okay, different. So that gives us the understanding of the Redeemer. Understanding, why that happens. And so this is where they are, and they understood very well that the next of kin could marry. And so Boaz was willing to be the Redeemer for Ruth. In fact, it's a beautiful concept. When we look at chapter 3, Ruth practically proposes to Boaz. Mm-hmm. Boaz is willing to marry her. Yeah. So it's just a powerful study. All right, so look at Ruth 4:13, and let's read all the way through verse 17. Okay.
It says, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David.
Okay, so if you're following along with this theme of do you like bread, with this concept of Bethlehem being the house of bread, mm-hmm. Notice, and again, the Redeemer concept, this would not be Ruth and Boaz's son. This would be Ruth and Mahlon's son. And so keep that in mind. This would be Naomi's child. Notice what that verse said. The women of the town have said, a son has been born to Naomi. But notice this son says that the women also said, he shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. He'll be a restorer of life. You know, I think it's important in Psalm 23, we're told, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Mm-hmm. This Lord will be a restorer of my soul that David says in Psalm 23, verse 3. Mm-hmm. The same phrase is used here by these women concerning this child. Wait a second. A son has been born to Naomi. She called herself Mara. A son has been born to Mara in Bethlehem. Well, you know where we get the name Mary? It's Mara. And I have to be careful with that definition because my wife's name is Mary. It literally means bitter. She's bitter when I point that out. So I can't do that, right? So a son, but which we're not talking about my wife. We're talking about another Mary, aren't we? Mm-hmm. A son has been born to Mary in Bethlehem. Wow. During the time of the judges. This is the providence of God. Talk about God at work during this time. And when the women say he shall be a restorer of your life, they're referring to Obed. But they're actually, through Scripture, through providence, it's referring to the Son of God. Because a son has been born to Naomi, they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And who was the son of David? Jesus the Christ. It was kind of funny. We kind of took it seemed like a break from discussion as we talked about Judah and Tamar and Perez and Zerah. But I'm going to read Ruth 4, verse 18. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Now who is Perez? One of the twins of Judah and Tamar. Mm-hmm. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. There it is. So Genesis 38 is not so obscure anymore, is it? Mm-mm. Talk about the providence of God. And by the way, who was Boaz's mother? Rahab. Salmon and Rahab had Boaz. Boaz and Ruth had Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. This is incredible to talk about the providence of God. So, the house of bread wasn't so empty after all. Mm-hmm. If it...
Hey, there's our... Sorry, 1 second.
We have theme music going, don't we?
That was
the Eureka. Actually, that's where our show ended last week. So right there, all right, that's our focus when it comes to, and we're just right at this point. Mm-hmm. A son was born to Mary in Bethlehem. The house of bread wasn't empty anymore. There was bread put back in that house. And John 6 and verse 35 says, do you want to read that?
Go ahead.
Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. So I'm going to ask the question again. Do you like bread? Thank you so much for joining us in our discussion today. I think it's been eye-opening. It's been just 4 small chapters in the book of Ruth. And we see the providence of God. We see a picture from Genesis all the way to Revelation. We understand God's at work. So when we feel famines, when we feel that the storms of life are getting to us, we got to recognize God's at work.
That's right.
God is still at work. His providence is still going on. May we rely on Him. Thank you again for joining us. If you got any questions, feel free to reach out to us at richard@deerfootcoc.com, and we'll try to get back to those questions as quick as we can. Yeah.
Or come visit us. We got our worship hours, and I'd like to go over those now. Our Sunday morning worship is at 8:15 and 10:30 a.m. Our Bible study is at 9:30 a.m. Our Sunday evening worship is at 5 p.m. and our Wednesday night devotional and Bible study is at 6:30 p.m.
Right.
So please come and join us and listen to the lessons from Richard or Tim or myself, and we'd love to study with you.
Yeah. And thanks again for joining us. Have a great day. God bless.
Have a good day.